What does that mean?
Means he starts making up words.
Look, they're doing math.
I don't think that's a conversation appropriate for children.
I don't want secrets.
The meaner you are, the more I like you.
It didn't mean anything, okay?
I'm sorry. Does it offend you?
I'm sure you know something I don't.
I feel strange having to talk to you in this way.
My God, you haven't thought this through.
Mr. Campbell, who cares?
Welcome to Mad Men, the weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. Each week, we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 to 2015. During our conversation, around the conversation the show is having about gender, the patriarchy, and elections that a lot of people probably don't know a lot of information about. Okay, with me on Mad Men, I'm of course John Negroni as per usual, but here are my running mates. First off, Will, why are you digging a hole yet again on this show? Are you planning to blow somebody up? It's Will Ashton.
Hello.
And there's his commanding officer, and he's not looking so good. He's looking a little bit mangled. It's Michael Overholse. Mangled Michael.
John, you peed yourself.
Oh, that's not pee. I think that's gasoline. But don't worry, I'm just going to smoke a quick cigarette and clean it up. Guys, welcome back to the show. We're talking about what a lot of people consider to be one of the best episodes of Mad Men, one of the best episodes of TV of that era. But you don't seem excited.
I was going to wait until we got a little bit deeper into the episode, but this might be, at least so far, my favorite episode of the season.
Yeah.
Upon this rewatch.
Will texted me. He was like, this is a good-ass episode. But Will, it sounds like you only like this episode because people actually get laid in this episode, as opposed to
that's part of
Summer.
it, because, I wasn't around for last week's episode. I can't comment on what you guys already said, so I don't want to repeat anything that might have already been uttered about the show.
Right.
However,
because we haven't released that episode yet, so you don't know what Mike and I got into, the gossip, and yeah.
But I think it deserves to be said, if it has already been said, that episode is real hot and bothered. Everybody's just horny and sweaty. And
you say that, but Don and Rachel get it on in that episode. So
yeah, true, but
to you it doesn't
that's
count
early on. Betty obviously wants something. Peggy gets an unexpected surprise. It's a fun episode, and I imagine you guys had a lot of fun talking about it.
Did you like that episode? If we can quickly,
yeah, I thought it started out a little slow, but I was getting along with it as it went along. It was nice to see the Rog Dog, as I call him now, Roger. I was a little bummed not to really see him in this episode that we're going to be discussing this week, but it was nice to catch up, see how he's doing. It seems like he's out for the count for the season, but maybe he'll come back around in the finale. I don't remember.
After a game of Duck, Duck, Goose, or Herman Phillips, Duck, Goose.
Isn't John Slattery still just like filming Desperate Housewives or something, which is why he's not around?
Pretty much. Well, and they also had the original plan, I think we've mentioned on the show before, is that he wasn't going to be part of the show after this. Like they were going to write him out essentially and have Duck kind of replace him and do all that stuff. But John Slattery made such a strong impression on Mad Men. I believe, like my understanding is that they decided to keep him around. He's Mr. Sterling.
Which is funny because Mark Moses, the actor who plays Duck Phillips, is a primary character or a primary actor on Desperate Housewives as well. So I guess they have
you seen that show?
Desperate Housewives?
Yeah.
My parents watched it. I've seen a fair bit of it. I haven't watched more than maybe like 3 or 4 full episodes, but I've seen several scenes out of context of that show. Have you watched Desperate Housewives?
Not once.
Okay. That's surprising. It was a pretty popular show,
It was, but it's like 2007. I was watching Avatar: The Last Airbender. I was having a childhood,
Yeah, I will say, I don't see a lot of people bringing it up that much anymore, which is not to criticize the show, but rather just talk about how it was a super popular show that sort of just lived in a vacuum. But it did give us, Eva Longoria's career, who's, she's doing a lot of things still. So that's probably the show's legacy at this point, as it were.
Name not to make this the Desperate Housewives podcast, but name one thing Eva Longoria is doing right now.
Oh, she just
Right
directed a
now?
movie at Sundance. She's
Damn, you got me there.
She's literally in Park City, Utah right now, Mike, like digging holes and, Okay.
I just Eva Longoria is not in the zeitgeist of Mike's mind.
Sure. Well, we can save that conversation for Desperate Housewives, man.
Yeah.
Desperate House Mikes.
So Nixon versus Kennedy. Yeah. Mike, what do you think about the original question here in terms of like, is this an all-timer?
I don't know if I'm just like, I mean, I'm wearing a beanie today and a flannel and feeling all hipstery, but I watched it and I really enjoyed it, but it got me thinking on rewatch, like, do we love this episode just because of like the reveals we get in it? And like, does it just feel good because a lot of things come to fruition, or is it actually like a good episode in itself?
Can it be a mix? Because I think a lot of it is the payoffs.
I think a lot of it is the payoffs, which I guess, like, yeah, I don't know. Does that make it a good episode? I think it does. Who knows?
It's like when you think of your favorite movies, like this is Matthew Weiner called this the climax of season 1. He's kind of following a formula that Prestige TV does a lot. Like Breaking Bad did this, Game of Thrones did this. Like your 9th episode of a 10-episode season is like your big episode.
BoJack Horseman did this famously. Yeah, because then that way, like if the 9th episode is the climax and the 10th episode can be about the resolution, it can set up threads for season 2, and it can just let you sort of exist with the show for have like a bit of a breather. Yeah, it's like kind of like an epilogue to season, just kind of a a coda.
And I think like think of your favorite movies. People tend to like the climaxes. Like the climax is the most exciting part. It's what we've been building up to. So it stands to reason that this would be that. I think some people have criticized the episode, maybe superficially of saying like, well, the first half of it doesn't really connect with the second half of it. First half of it is mainly like with the Sterling Cooper office, kind of reveling, having a good time. And then the second half of the episode focuses more on Dawn versus Pete, and, actually bringing that to a head. But let's start with that. Will, what do you think? Do you think there's any merit to that criticism?
I mean, I can see why people say that, because like I kind of had to remind myself that was the beginning of this episode, because I watched, because as we mentioned, I didn't get a chance to see the previous episode until this week. So I watched them pretty much back to back. And so I had to kind of remind myself, I was like, did that happen in the last episode, or is that also this episode? But obviously, it is the beginning of this episode. And I like that it kind of feels like, the party's happening at the beginning. And this is, as in the office, the hope of Nixon winning is kind of alive and well, and everyone's kind of getting it on and all that stuff. And this is that cold, bucket of water slapping their face in the morning. It's, they are the losers, they lost to Kennedy. Their campaign failed as it was. And, now they kind of have to reap what they sow in some respects. And, in that respect, Don in a separate fashion is also getting his own kind of cold wake up call, his return to reality as it was, his, kind of his awakening. And so I don't know. I think thematically it does actually make sense, but it is a little jarring when you think back on the episode for sure.
Classic Mad Men subversion, by the way, too, right? How we see mainly a lot of very young people hoping that Nixon, the traditionally stodgy, older conservative guy, versus like Kennedy is seen as like, oh, he won because of the youth vote. I do like, though, how this kind of gets across something from history that, like I was alluding to before, tends to be a little glossed over, which is that this was a very close campaign, was very contested. It wasn't sort of this landslide where Kennedy was, because people remember the 60s as like the Cultural Revolution and, youth in revolt. But in reality, a lot of people didn't know if they wanted to sort of like rekindle the dream of the 1950s, Eisenhower's presidency continued through Nixon, or if they wanted the sort of fresh-faced jingle, obsessed John F. Kennedy. It is a very funny sort of subversion that Mad Men's good at doing. What about you, Michael? I mean, how do you pair these two halves of the episode?
I do think it's a very jarring split, but I both think they're very interesting, each within themselves. speaking to like the subversion of the young opinion, I really like the moment. I'm trying to remember who says it. I don't think it was Paul, but they're talking about it was a win-win, right? Because either Nixon wins and everybody's excited, or Nixon loses and
that's Paul.
You need a shoulder. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, he's kind of
And it's just-
echoing to, or like foreshadowing to Burt Cooper's sort of attitude after it looks like Nixon's going to lose, and he's like, well, we still win anyway. We're going to get something out of Kennedy winning.
Yeah, Kennedy wants to buy his way to the win, right? So at the end of the day, right, capitalism is the winner.
If he's willing to buy an election, he might play ball with us.
But I do think it is a very stark first and second half of the episode, and I really think you kind of have to analyze them both individually. And it feels like that scene with Trudy in the box is the bridge between the two.
No more secrets. Everything is getting revealed. Yeah.
No more secrets. Absolutely.
Right.
I think that's the last secret in Mad Men.
Yeah.
Well, last one for Pete, right? Yeah, because
I guess he never actually tells Trudy what's in the box, so technically it's still a secret. Just I guess no more.
What's in the box?
My father had a box like that. I looked inside and I regretted it. Oh, Trudy.
Well, I didn't know you guys made that joke last week. I wasn't around.
I definitely. My thought was like Trudy thinks that it's like just porn in the box, right? Like that's the idea.
She definitely thinks it's porn. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe.
Well, what was?
Porn. Who knows?
Well, I mean, do you guys have any guesses as far as what was in Trudy's father's box?
Porn.
You think that was also porn?
Yeah,
that might have been something a little bit.
Porn.
Well, that's what I'm thinking is that it might have been something a little bit more devastating for her. 'Cause she was just like, it was like a big mistake. And there's like an air of like, it still haunts her when she thinks back on that moment.
I mean, I think it would haunt you too. If you were in her shoes, like the way you grow up and then
I guess
you find out that your parent, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like, would that still bother her as an adult knowing
I think
that?
it would bother her that her husband would be kind of following in that same, like, I'm not good enough, that sentiment, or that thinking that like that traditional thinking that like, porn means that he doesn't get something from me.
I don't know. The way I read that line reading was that it was something a little bit more confounding.
Like what? Like that he's like the Zodiac killer? Like what are you alluding to?
I'm not saying it's something like huge, but I mean, it sounds like if it's not addressed later on, then it's not as big of a deal. But I don't know, just the way that Alison Brie delivered that line, I thought it was something a little bit
imagining,
more.
Like, have you watched the show You, Michael? I know Will hasn't, but like where he has like the box. Yeah. That's like what I'm imagining Will thinks it is.
I think it makes sense. Well, I get what Will's saying, right? There's an air of extra scandal in the way she delivers a line, and I think our modern brain sees that, and it's like, oh, porn's not a big deal; it's everywhere, so it has to be like a step above porn, right? But I do think back then, just porn in itself, right? This idea of masturbation. We covered this all last week. Like,
yeah,
that's
well, you missed it.
So, like, what kind of porn do you think it was? Do you think it was just like Betty Page stuff, or do you think it's like dirty?
Well, I will say I don't want to give anything away, but there is something we learn about Trudy's father a long time from now, way later into the show, that I think will probably pay this off. So I guess we could put a pin on that.
Okay.
Yeah,
let's put the lid on this box and put it up in our closet.
yeah, let's put it back in the closet. Let's stay in the closet from now on, boys.
Oh boy.
Yeah, speaking of that, Sal gets his own fun little moment with Joan. I do not want to miss a chance to talk about Sal.
Oh, yes.
You missed
yes, sir, good.
Well, you missed a little bit of like some Sal misadventure last week.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was going to say, speaking of subverting expectations, I like this one in particular because, when you see a scene like this set up where it's like, oh, he found the secret play or whatever that he wrote, you kind of expect like a fight to ensue, like he's going to chase him around the office. And, they kind of play that up because just before there's that scene where he's chasing Hildy, I think, around the office.
Allison.
Allison. Yeah, you're right. Around the office to like check her underwear. So you think it's going to be like a similar thing where he's going to like chase him down the office and like punch him.
By the way, nice foreshadowing there that her underwear is blue and like they're all guessing like blue as in Kennedy wins.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but that's a good catch. Good catch, Jonathan.
Weiner knows what he's doing. Oh, by the way, we didn't say who directed this episode, and I'm so sorry to cut you off, but real quick, Alan Taylor returns to direct. He directed the pilot, famous director of Sopranos, Game of Thrones, Thor: The Dark World, some of the classics. This was written by Lisa Albert and co-written by Maria and Andre Jacques Metten, who did it, I think, like 2 or 3 episodes ago. Mike is laughing weirdly.
Why are you laughing, Michael?
Yeah.
Thor: The Dark World, all the classics.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. Well, don't forget, Terminator Genesis is also on his filmography.
I couldn't cover everything. I only had so many words to fit into that.
Sure.
Sentence. Yeah.
But anyway,
sorry.
Yeah, but like a traditional show, because we talk about this a lot. Like Mad Men is good about like kind of subverting expectations where you expect something more violent or more extreme to happen in a given scenario, and something like that you expect like a brawl to ensue or something.
Yeah,
but
Kenny and Freddie almost got into it last episode with the electricizer,
right.
The rejuvenator or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of expect like this ensuing fight or whatever, but no, a moment later you're just performing the play, and obviously Ken is kind of mocking it or whatever, but he takes it relatively.
I think
well.
it's because partly they're drunk, and Paul has like a little bit of the pride, bubbling inside him. Yeah.
But yeah, I like to imagine if I were to have found a play in your residence or your office that something similar would happen. You would make Mike and I play the parts. We would share a smooch.
I would act the shit out of a John one act. You know what I mean? Like I would give everything I had for that role.
Was this
I'm
only
not
a
like
one
that
act?
hack Maverick Hines? An animal in the podcast studio, and go ahead.
The play's about like Don inspires that main character, right? Like that's Don.
Well, Paul wants to be Don. Paul showed his insecurity in that last episode where he was like, "Do you think Don likes me?" And there is that sort of. I think Paul especially probably doesn't realize that he's maybe a little bit more to Roger a little bit, and I think they try to get that across with the way that he interacts with Joan and that whole scene they kind of have together.
And also, that play is kind of foreshadowing a little bit what happens later on, right? Like it's kind of mirroring a little bit the dynamic that Pete has, where like the play, like we're mentioning, is kind of like what if Paul became like a Don type, and Pete's kind of trying to find himself in a similar position where he's like, what if I became a person like Don? Like how would that happen? Well, he has to resort to blatant blackmail, but he's like, well, it's in my grasp, and that's kind of fitting too, because both Don, not to jump ahead, but like Don and Pete have these sort of like thematic or cinematic way of thinking things are going to play out in this episode. Like they have sort of dramatic tendencies where they think things are going to be a lot more sort of theatrical as these revelations get revealed and things play or don't play in their favor. And obviously
you can connect to the election. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then obviously reality plays a lot more casually than it actually, things actually play out. So it is like, fitting. And that's where I think the Kennedy Nixon stuff actually favors well, especially because that stuff weirdly kind of just fades into the background. Like the revelation that Kennedy officially won is mostly in that one shot. Like it's behind Pete on the TV, right? That's like where we officially find out that Kennedy won. It's obviously foreshadowed when Bert talks to Don, but it's like that's like the revelation. It's just like something that just happens literally behind Pete in the background,
right?
Even though, which I think is quite good.
This pays off all of the connections and conversations that like Don and Pete have whenever the Nixon campaign gets brought up, that Don sees himself as Nixon. Pete is kind of the Elvis like Kennedy. And, the anxiety that Don has about Pete is very, purposely connected to the way a lot of people felt alienated and scared of somebody like Pete kind of rising to this position early, especially like when you look at history. John F. Kennedy at that point was the youngest person to ever be elected president. It might still be. I don't remember if anybody beat him on that. I think Barack Obama was older than Kennedy was at that point too. So I think I could be fact checked and rightfully corrected there, but yeah, that was certainly,
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like, wasn't like Obama a couple years older than Kennedy when he won? Like 30.
Sean's actually right. I'm surprised.
Thank you. I think like they were both in their 40s, right? Because I think like the presidential eligibility age is like 35. I don't think we've ever had a president in their 30s. We've all been in their 40s, but yeah, at the very youngest. But then most of them are 60s. You know, that's like the sweet spot. And now we get presidents in the 70s. We just keep, moving forward, I guess.
Sure. Well, so, I mean, you never know. What if like AOC becomes the president at age 38 or something?
I don't think she's ever going to run.
I don't know. I don't know, fortune teller.
Well, she literally said it in GQ. Recently, she's like, "I will never run for president."
Okay.
And she said it before, but anyway, I you know what? I was going to bring this up in terms of like, how do you guys think this show makes you feel about like modern politics? I know like the listeners would love to hear that. They'd love to hear some polarization and divisive.
Oh boy, yeah. The reviews of the show only get more favorable when we bring up politics more. Yeah.
Well, we don't have to get on a soapbox or anything, but I think that there is merit to the discussion around how like this episode probably hits a lot different after the 2020 election, because this was like 1960 was one of the most contested elections of all time. It was the first time computers were used. It was the first time I think it was contested in all 50 states. There was certainly like a lot of accusations of fraud. Obviously, it's not a one-to-one with 2020 and how things went down, but certainly they kind of are like mirror images of each other, maybe two sides of the same electoral coin. I guess like if you were watching this in 2007, or I think it came out in 2007, not 2008, you would probably look at this and be like, this kind of, for me, connects more to the 2000 election with Bush and Gore, which went on and on and on. Because I think I'm right about this, that was at that point in 1960, the latest, like the longest amount of time it took for people to find out who the president was until the Bush Gore election, which took even longer. So yeah, I think that there is like something to be said about how you can watch this in 2022 and kind of have even more sort of like a modern context and what the show is doing.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting going through, Bert saying that they gave Kennedy all the corpses in a certain county, and but saying like, oh, he got over 50% of the vote, so we'll have that to lean on. And it was just like, it was the Leonardo DiCaprio meme. I was pointing, being like, "Oh, that's it."
Yeah. Yeah, nothing new under the sun. I mean, you can watch this, and maybe someday people will watch this in the future and be like, "Oh, is this kind of like when did this come out?" Maybe erroneously thinking, that this was after like the 2016 election, where that was like a very like common accusation of like, "Oh, dead people voted" and all that stuff. So, but no, it existed long before all that. But yeah, Nixon, Kennedy. What else did you guys want to cover in this episode? I don't know is there anything you wanted to cover in the party and stuff before we get to the Dawn flashback stuff, because there's a lot of material there.
In the party, I do want to point out like Peggy's aversion to the party and Peggy's feeling of I can't be around. Like, I guess that's after she says I can't be around these people, but it's just so clear that she feels differently and is wired so much differently than everybody else in this office, and can't believe that this is happening. And the juxtaposition of her being disgusted about what color is your panties games with the woman who was tackled literally like going arm in arm, laughing away like when it was over, is such like okay, Peggy's different.
And to think I could have found my president, and to think I thought I could find my husband in this office.
Yeah. Marge gets a little extra time in this episode, which is kind of, I forgot that Stephanie Courtney gets to show up and do some more lines here. I do think this contradicts. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, is she in season 2? Is this the last season first?
I think this is it for her. I don't think
this episode.
I think so.
Okay.
But I'm not 100% sure.
I mean, it would make sense given that the commercials would start around then. They didn't start already, but
which, by the way, no Lois at the party. Is she okay? Do you think the bowling team went late? Like, what happened?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, well, the last time she tried to meet Sal at a party, it didn't go too well. So
right, she's just a little allergic to going to parties with Sal. But actually, that's what I was going to ask before. It's like, do you think that this contradicts like Peggy's character, like the way she behaves in that party versus how she behaves in this party? Or do you think that there is like an intentional difference here in how she's sort of being a bit more of a stick in the mud? Whereas in the last party, she was doing the twist. She was having a good time.
I think that there has been time and a lot has happened personally in Peggy's life. Professionally, especially, that makes her feel that she's above a lot of the, to use the current sitting president's favorite word, malarkey. And I also think for some reason, maybe Peggy seems to be a little bit more emotionally charged, and I wonder why that is.
Yeah. I guess we shouldn't say, huh? All right.
I mean, I know, but the listeners may not. So
we have Sal's very awkward kiss with Joan during the play, and I obviously, like, I didn't notice this the first time I ever watched the show, but clearly, like Joan's expression, I tend to sort of miss how that kind of goes down, and how she's just a little bit like, wait a second. Like,
I was going to ask you.
Guys.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, like, I was kind of wondering what your guys' read of that was. Like, it was, like the way she looks at him. Is it supposed to be like that's her kind of figuring out, like, he kisses in a sort of like effeminate way, or like?
I don't think effeminate. No, I think
not
like
effeminate.
Like he's not actually like into it.
Oh,
it's
okay,
like staged.
Yeah,
you know?
Right. Because like any other guy in the office would take the opportunity to like really, sell a moment like that. He just kind of is very kind of cavalier almost in a way about it. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was very interesting. I was definitely paying a lot of attention to her expression in that moment.
And you can tell too, I mean, she's somebody who just recently, experienced her roommate coming out of the closet. So this isn't exactly something that is a very foreign thought to her, this idea of somebody sort of, going against gender norms for that time.
Joan's gaydar is through the roof right now.
I mean,
Carol forged her gaydar in the fires of Manhattan.
I mean, it should also be said that Sal borrowed Peggy's dress or skirt or something at one moment, though I guess unfortunately we didn't get to see that during the party. So,
hey, I mean, Some Like It Hot came out not too long before this, so they probably thought that was like a come on. Okay. So, the other thing that happens in this party that's pretty big is we kind of have the Harry and Hildy thing happen, which was set up several episodes ago when you see Harry and Hildy dancing in the hobo code to, I think it was the twist again. And, we get a little bit of like, Harry's a little bit like, he kind of has like a comment early in the episode, like, that's my wife, like clearly there's some issues. Remember, like early toward the beginning of the season, he stopped smoking or was trying to quit. And we see him smoke in this episode. So clearly something's like stressing him out. And that comes to a fruition when it's announced that Ohio goes to Nixon. And that's a lot of electoral votes. And then Harry start making out. They go to his office. One thing leads to another. What's your take on this? Do you think that my thing? I have a whole thing with this, but I kind of want to say, we'd start with you, Will. Like, why do you think that this matters? this little like subplot that happens. Like, what do you think it's trying to do?
I mean, I think it kind of establishes what we were talking about before, where it's like the romanticism of them kind of believing their own lie, in the sense of like they really believe that Nixon's going to win, like their campaign pulled off. They kind of beat the odds. And, even though Kennedy has the jingle and everything seems to kind of work in his favor, they're going to win it out. And they kind of, they're swept up in the moment. And then there's that moment, like you said, where his glasses come off. And I don't know, not to be a nerd or anything, but I don't know if there was kind of like a Superman thing going on there, where it's like, like the glasses are off and it's like he's actually, this kind of suave guy in the moment. And, this kind of unexpected romance blooms, but then, the daylight
I think
comes.
It was like a Love is Blind kind of thing. I don't know if
sure, that's what I think it is too. But, sometimes
there is the whole thing where he says like, oh, Don could be Batman for all we know. Does that make him Superman in his eyes?
Sure. I mean, I'd like to believe that's what he believes, because he's a dang nerd like me. But anyway, the daylight comes. Obviously, things take a turn for the Nixon campaign. That's kind of the end of his hurrah before, obviously the votes are still getting counted and stuff, but it's looking more and more likely after that moment that Kennedy's going to win. The tides are changing. It's now the early 60s. And, this is kind of the progression point where things are going to change. And it's
already the early 60s.
I know, but like politically things are changing is what I meant to say. But like it. But The Office is what I'm trying to say is that like they have this sort of stodgy 50s mentality. That's a largely conservative office, maybe not always politically, but mentally they have this kind of old fashioned stuck in their ways mentality. And this is kind of like this awakening moment where they kind of, they were kind of drunk on and, in love with the idea that things are going to turn out their way, but they're getting this kind of hard, walk of shame moment this early morning where they realize that, they didn't pull it off. It's going to be, it's going to be different than they expect.
Kool-Aid.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I appreciate that scene. I mean, I don't know if it's going to lead to anything between the two characters later on. I can't remember if they have anything happen in the last episode of the season, but I kind of like it for that moment. It is a good kind of encapsulated metaphor for what's happening in the office at that time.
Which, by the way, we can't let it slide that Allison, who works at the front desk, sleeps with Ken Cosgrove, he wins a lot this season, He got that shot in with Freddie. He got, a short story published. He
got to see
Paul at his own game.
Yeah, he got to see that lady's underwear. It's all looking up for him.
Horrific, like that whole thing. Like
he saw a lot more than her underwear.
Well, yeah, sure.
The sexual harassment in this episode. Good Lord.
Yeah. I gotta say, I mean, I know like Ken's kind of your guy, but I feel like this season he's just not.
He regresses.
Not a good
well,
dude.
he regressed in this moment, and
I don't know. I mean,
I just want him to change. Unlike Allison,
I feel like he's generally a dick in the first season. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, I remember when I first watched this, I thought they were trying to set up a foil to Peggy and Pete. Like, I was like, oh, this is going to be maybe like a sweet office romance compared to the very, very toxic Pete and Peggy. And that was my very first read of it. I also remember very started thinking like, wow, that's a lot of side boob to be on TV. Like,
jeez.
The times they are changing.
You hound dog. I had the same thought.
Roger's not the only hound dog.
I was just be like, Willie, you just talked about how much you love the masturbation episode. I think I can say side boob.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I would say I think with like with I agree with a lot of what you said there, Will and Mike, in terms of what they're kind of doing with these characters and like the symbolism of it, and kind of getting across that like I think Harry is a bit of a Nixon in the sense that like, he was able to woo sort of like the younger voter sort of person, but like in the afterglow of this entire election night, and arguably in real life, there's like this disenfranchisement with him. I took a little bit of like, Don's not the only person who can kind of emulate Nixon. There's a lot of that we can see in Harry Crane. And I think that's something to pay attention to moving forward. It looks like you guys are bonding over your Gatorade bottles. Okay, I should go grab one, apparently. Gatorade at 11 a.m. I love it. So my other thing, though, is like I kind of have this sneaking suspicion. I don't know what you guys think of this, that I think that like you guys are grinning like a couple of best friends. My gosh, I feel like I'm the teacher of class trying to give a lecture, but you guys are like clowning around at the back. No, I think that they were trying to set up maybe some like season 2 stuff here. And I think like with Joan, especially like Joan and Paul, they were trying to set stuff up like, oh, what are some of the B plots or C plots we can do next season? Post like to what you're saying, Mike, like post Pete and Peggy, like what can we do of like, can we have like a Harry Crane and Hildy thing kind of going on? Can we do this? And I won't say, of course, what happens, but certainly like I get that sense. Like shows do this a lot where they're like, okay, we have these actors, let's kind of test it out. Like let's do a chemistry test on screen and see how people react. And I think people probably watch this and were like, ew, gross. Like, but
do you know, like, at what point, like, did they know there's going to be a season 2? Did it get renewed halfway through season 1?
I think so at this point. I think that they renewed it. I'll look it up, but I think they renewed it, like, only partway through season 1.
Because I think it matters. I think that is a really good point. I'd be curious on, like, how much was planned for season 2, and at what point Weiner knew what he was going to do compared to, like, putting out the feelers. Because it definitely feels like that, right? You have multiple romances in this episode, and I think even in the next episode, that you're just like, is this going to go anywhere? And a lot of it doesn't.
Well, I was wondering about this. The writer's strike happens at some point. I think, between seasons 1 and 2, right? For the show. Am I not?
What was that again?
I said the writer's strike. Doesn't that happen somewhere around the end?
I think it was like
season
after
1?
this, because I think it was more of like 2006, like early 2007. And I think that this, by the time that was going down, this season was already in the tank. I think this is just one of those rare shows because of when it came out that it sort of managed to be in the middle of it, but not quite like when it would have been mostly affected. That's that's what I think.
I just didn't know if like what you're talking about was a byproduct of the writer's strike where things might have been in place or things they had in mind kind of got subverted or dodged because of the writer's strike. Because obviously I know that was more of a factor for Breaking Bad when season 1 premiered that show. Like the season got shortened and there was like a big change in character, like Jesse was going to die in season 1 and the writer's strike prevented that from happening. So I just didn't know if there were any kind of major story effects that happened with Mad Men, but I guess like what you're saying, yeah, it didn't really affect the show all that much in the long run.
I can't seem to find any like concrete info on when the season was renewed. I feel like I've heard it in like an interview somewhere, but I'd have to do more digging.
I mean, it was a huge hit for AMC when it premiered. Like, I mean, not only critically, but I thought like it became like it exceeded their expectations and then some. So I imagine the show
it won an Emmy.
Sure,
yeah, it won Outstanding Drama Series. It won a Golden Globe. It won a Peabody. Like, I don't know how good the ratings were. I think the ratings were probably quite good for what it was, but I think it was more about like the acclaim is what shot it. Actually, I have it right here because I was just looking. The premiere episode, July 2007. Hey, it was rated higher than any other AMC original series at the time. So 1.2 million households, which back then wasn't a ton, but these days that's pretty decent considering.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, and for AMC that was pretty big, but they were obviously banking a lot on this being a big hit because like the reason I thought that the show didn't get picked up by like HBO and like ABC and a few other stations was like everyone was like, yeah, this is clearly a really good script for the pilot, but like it's way too expensive and too much of a gamble for, you know, a first season. Like we just don't know for sure the audiences are going to respond to this and all that stuff. And AMC was just the one station was like, yeah, you know, we kind of want to prove that we're not just a movie station. We want to like do some TV stuff. Like we'll take a gamble on this. Like this seems like a good show.
You can tell from the original poster of season 1, like when the show started airing, how do you market this? And the way they mainly marketed it was, from one of the writers and executive producers of The Sopranos. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like they clearly knew that this would be hard to like get people interested in, you know,
well,
which speaks to like, I thought the Mad Men was like a gangster show or something when it was coming out. I didn't know it was about advertising because
I mean, yeah,
it was bad at advertising.
Yeah, they had bad advertising. That's so funny.
Yeah, and I was about to say the irony of the show struggling with advertising a show about advertising is quite rich.
I'll never forget, like in between seasons 5 and 6, I want to say, they did an ad for season 6 and it just used B-roll footage from season 5. And it was so bad. I was like, this does not get me excited for season 6. What are you doing? But I will say that the posters that they did for the seasons, like they would release them on social media because this show was coming out like when social media was really starting to like take off, especially on Twitter. And I'll never forget the season 6 poster in particular is like a masterclass in like getting you like pumped up through just one image. So anyway, back to Nixon versus Kennedy. Sorry for all the tangents. Anything? I think we covered a lot of the party, probably a few things we missed, but I feel like we got to get to Don's flashbacks here, particularly like what prompts it. So looks like you guys are good. Don has this moment, of course, where Pete comes into the office the next day. No one seems to know like who won, but Pete kind of comes into his office and he hangs the blackmail over his head that, you know, if Don doesn't promote him to head of accounts, which Pete has already sort of been like asking him to do since the beginning of the episode, then Pete is going to reveal the information that Don is not who he says he is and all of that. And you do get the sense like it's been a while since the last episode, since Indian Summer, because that was in October and now we're in the first week of November. Pete's been sitting on this and I think he's been scared to do it. Like he's been scared to kind of go this far. And you can kind of see why, right?
I was going to say, because doesn't Pete casually in this episode or last episode say it's been 2 years since like he joined the office or whatever? Or maybe that was Peggy. Someone mentioned it's been 2.5 years, which I honestly thought it was like 6 months. Like I didn't realize that much time had passed in this season.
I think he starts the show 26. I think at this point he's probably turned 27, but I don't think it's ever confirmed either way. I don't think we know his birthday. So he might have just turned 26 at the beginning of the show. But yeah, I mean, he's in his mid-20s.
Happy birthday.
There you go. Yeah, so like to me, the idea of him considering himself ready for a head of accounts is actually kind of like ridiculous. Like they're a pretty small agency, but like I can't think of a lot of firms that would have somebody from age 26 be head of accounts unless it's nepotism, right?
Hang on. Are you saying that Pete Campbell is acting ridiculous in the office? I can't believe this.
Wait, are you trying to tell me that Pete Campbell has so much pride he's not using logic and reason?
What a bombshell that we're
because like Don does kind of give him a chance, right? He's like he basically says like why, and what does Pete come up with? Well, I've been here 2.5 years. I have the loyalty of our most respected clients.
But like at this point, yeah, exactly. It's like he's like, what clients have you brought in? Like Bert even says at that later point in the episode, like I would focus on bringing in clients. Like at no point has Pete done that, which is like the point of head of accounts. It's not just keeping clients, it's bringing in new business. And yeah, I mean, I think there is like, you could probably look at it as like Don just doesn't like Pete, but I think Don is self-interested enough to be like, I mean, if Pete really was, deserving of this job at this point, he probably would consider it, but
why would, I mean, he's giving Peggy a shot, like,
sure,
which is not something that someone of his stature would do. So, like, Don does promote talent, right? Or he at least acknowledges it.
I mean, there is something to be said. I mean, not to jump ahead again, but like the story with the real Don and Dick Whitman is kind of meant to be mirroring some things that are happening where like he kind of wants to father or like mentor a younger figure in a way. Like I think
have you seen his real kids? They're so dull. Sure. Like I'm just kidding.
But I mean, like I think
they're obsessed with lightning bugs. It's pretty embarrassing.
I think there is a part of Don, and I don't think he'll acknowledge it, but I think there's a part of him that kind of, in a way, wants to sort of mentor, and that's obviously like we said. Like I think that's coming through with Peggy, and there is like a couple moments where I think he wants to do the same for Pete because he can see his drive, even though he is a nepotism baby, as it were. Like he does see like, yeah, he like wants to prove himself. He kind of wants to be his own man and stuff like that. And he can almost respect that, but then he just does something or says something or he snivels and it's like, nah, fuck this dude. He sucks. No, I'm not dealing with this.
Look at the mentors in Don's life. First one we really see is like the hobo, and then obviously his father isn't a mentor to him. Uncle Mac isn't a mentor. Right. He goes from the hobo straight to the real Don Draper for like a day.
Yes.
And then he goes from that to Roger. And then kind of over this season, he goes from Roger to Bert, and Bert kind of, he has that speech with him. And it's like, we are alike, a little bit like you're self-interested and totally, I think that he
have you
obviously
read Atlas Shrugged?
Beware the nonconformist. And by the way, I love Bert Cooper so much in this season. I wish the rest of the show was as good with Bert as it is this season. Not that it's bad, but I think that this is his best season, probably. Maybe I'll have to revisit that when we're done. But I mean, he has so many good lines. I love the payoff to everything his character has been alluded to at this point because it makes, his moment in this episode so much more significant.
Yeah.
But
who is John Galt, Don?
Exactly. But yeah, no, I think that Don probably feels a little bit like, because we find out through the flashbacks, right, that the real Don Draper was killed because of Don, like because of Dick. Like Dick, messed up and lit the cigarette. His smoking habit literally got somebody killed. He literally digged the real Don Draper's own grave. I guess you could read that as like he's digging Dick's grave.
He's literally pissing around, and yeah.
And then, the real Don gets pissed off. Also love how like that flashback scene is that both of the flashback scenes like do not glamorize war whatsoever. Like they really get to the heart of like how horrifying it is and how like not glamorous it was. Kind of speaking to the election too, in that sense of like it's not how like the history tends to recount it. It actually is pretty tough to like sit through. How the sausage.
I thought it was a good speech when he meets the real Don the first time, and he's like, "Well, how'd they get you in?"
Yeah.
And you can see how the military capitalizes on these. capitalizes on these in multiple ways.
Praise on, you could argue, not to be, I don't want to be anti-veteran whatsoever. I'm not, but certainly like there is an air of that, especially in the Korean War. Korean War was a huge mess, Vietnam War and all of that. And particularly with Don, I think, or with Dick Whitman to an extent, when he has that moment where he's like, I just need to leave, and he's just like, are you starting to reconsider this being a step up? And it's like, it's such a good line. The dialogue in this episode is off the charts.
I will say I did appreciate, because I watched this on Amazon, and I liked that when it went back to the flashback sequences, I paused it, and normally where it says like John Hamm is Don Draper,
maybe even Donald Draper.
Yeah, they changed it when it's the flashback, so it says John Hamm, Richard Whitman. I was like, that's a nice touch. Yeah, I thought that was nice. Yeah,
I do think it's also a nice touch that cigarettes made Don Draper twice, right? It turned him into Don Draper originally, and then it's right in the first episode. It really what's is your first taste to see what makes Don Draper.
Well, yeah, because he literally goes from somebody whose name is Dick Whitman. A wit means small, right? His name literally meant man with small dick. And then he becomes Don Draper, like Don, of course, being like it's a bit of the Count of Monte Cristo, like they're like Mask of Zorro, like the reinvention of somebody in disguise. It's like noble person, Draper, clearly alluding to like, close the drapes, honey, and all of that. Like a much more sexually charged name is what I'm trying to argue. That's where Don Draper is born, and that's where the Dick,
Yeah, and not only that, but like I noticed that when John Hamm was playing Dick Whitman, he either raised his voice or they raised him post, so it's a lot higher. Like in a way, it's almost like he hasn't hit
like
puberty yet. Well, no, I was saying like it's like puberty, like he hasn't become a man in a way, like he's still a boy.
His voice is cracking, and
right, yeah, exactly, yeah. So it's like he's like prepubescent.
He became a man on that train.
Yeah,
he did.
Well, that train scene, I do want to talk about that when we can, but I think that's a pretty,
Let's go for
another.
It. Why not?
Well, sure.
Well,
I mean,
before we get there, I do just want to say before we get there, sorry. I think they made that corpse of real Don Draper look so good.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's gnarly.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a precursor to Walking Dead in some ways. This is like a few years before that show took off.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really high quality for a TV corpse of that time. You could have not had the corpse in the shot at all. But anyways,
our resident necrophiliac has waited.
Yeah, or they would just put like smut on his face, like this on something cheap. But no, he's like, he's a rotisserie chicken in that scene. He's all cooked up. Yeah.
It was brought up earlier in the season that Adam recalls how he's like, I knew I saw you on that train. This is the payoff to that, where we see like Adam really did see Don on the train. Don, of course, was expected to bring Dick Whitman, the real Don Draper, home as per custom, but he's not able to do it. But we see, Abigail, we see Uncle Mac, and we see Adam. Adam kind of runs after him and all of that. What did you want to remark upon with this scene, Will?
Well, I mean, I just think it's another example of like kind of the metaphor of the scene really kind of complementing the episode, where we have, like we said, Don/Dick in this moment, looking out on his family, or like sort of his family, because that's obviously not his dad or his real dad. And then you have like his mom who's distant, and Adam, and in this moment, it's like the turning point. Obviously, it's like he is kind of becoming this other person, almost like against his will in a weird way. Like this train is moving forward, like life is just kind of pushing him forward. He's always going to be running. It's just innately his nature, and he's still looking back at this moment, like he can't help but look at it, but he can't really confront what happened. And you have like Adam, this one person in his life, still kind of looking in, trying, chasing him forward, but it's he's kind of doing this impossible act where he's like trying to chase at life and connect with his brother, which is never obviously going to happen now that he's killed himself. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's, a pretty stark visual metaphor. And, like, obviously he's like chasing the woman, kind of chasing the allure of being this, self-made man in many respects, like kind of, having his like cherry popped in a weird way. Like I think he might have had sex before, but like the idea that like now he's becoming, Don in full, like he's gonna get with this lady and all this stuff. And yeah, I just think it's a good scene.
We'll remind the listeners that Will hasn't seen past this season, so yeah, I won't say anything about confirm either way. in terms
we
of
get to
Don's virginity
see
status.
Well,
I don't know, Will. I mean, I'm not going to tell you, but yeah, that's a weird growl. Okay. We got to go back, of course, to, after Don gets this news that, Pete knows who he is, he kind of freaks out, he panics, and you start to see him for the first time in the show, I think, like, really rattled. It's a very rare thing for him. He runs to Rachel and tries to run away with her to California. And just keep that in mind, that is like a running theme with Don. Keep in mind, Don's fascination with California is very interesting. And it's something that this season touches upon. But of course, I don't think, it's going to be a while before we get, I think, more information, more insight into why that is. And he just wants to run away. And Rachel kind of correctly, like, as she sort of like looks past, because she's so good at reading him, she's able to be like, you don't want to run away with me, you just want to run away. And she's like, you haven't thought this through, like, what about your kids? And I think that this is such a great moment for her, and it's such a great way for Maggie Siff to kind of like punctuate this affair, where she's just like, what kind of man are you? Like, she finally sees for the first time, like, somebody who's willing to do what he has done, not just in that moment, but up until this point. It's where for her, the sort of like reality of who Nixon, I mean, Don Draper is, where she's able to sort of be like, you know what, I'm voting for Pete Campbell. Sorry. But no, I think that it's a great moment for her, and it obviously connects, of course, to the sort of like America's disillusionment with Richard Nixon in the ensuing years.
And obviously we've seen shades of Dick in the present day, as it were.
Yeah, we did. Oh, you're talking about something else.
Sure. But I mean, like, this scene with her, we have like the first real moment where we get to see like Don and Dick intersecting, and like his voice is a little bit higher. It made me wonder if there was like Elizabeth, who's the Theranos lady?
Elizabeth Holmes.
Yeah, Elizabeth Holmes, like kind of a thing where like Don's
Did she have
voice
this moment?
Well, I don't know. I mean, but like, like when he's talking to her, like his voice is like a little bit higher, like in that scene before, like where, it
this
makes me think
there is. Yeah, he's a little bit higher in that. You're right.
Right. And it just made me think that like when he is Don, is he like also like kind of doing that voice too? Like, is it like, him kind of being that person at all times? And so, yeah, like when we have this like rare unguarded moment with Don / Dick, and he's like kind of like running to his mom in a weird way, like, mom, like this kid's making fun of me at school, and it's him being like a boy in front of his mom in a weird way, which is weird because obviously she's younger than him, but yeah, there's like this weird kind of moment where like he's like trying to run away, he's like always willing to like kind of avoid his problems and not really confront them if he can. And that kind of made me wonder, when we get that scene with him and Bert, if it's less like he just gains confidence and more just kind of just being like, you know what?
It's Peggy.
Yeah. It's like, well, if whatever happens. Like if they find out I'm a fraud, you know what? I'll just go to California.
I think it's two things. It's the conversation he has with Bert, who's just sort of like fair.
Right.
Very good. And then it's when Peggy talks to him about fairness. And that is what pushes him to sort of, realize that, you know what, like, I think in that moment he decides that he has to like take care of this himself and be a man. But to what you're saying, Will, I remember reading a piece from Emily St. James. I didn't reread it for this episode, but I'd have to look back at it. But I remember one thing she said about this episode for the AV Club back when I think season 5 was airing. Her argument was like, a lot of people say that like he's oscillating sort of between Don and Dick at all times. Like he turns off a switch, turns on a switch. I know we've done that. And her argument is like, it's probably less productive to think it in that frame and to look at it more as like he's both and. Like he's not either one at any given time. He's kind of both people at all times and kind of something else, which I always thought was like something kind of interesting as a read on him in this scene, because there is a little bit of Don in there too. Like you can't just, Don isn't totally shut out. There is a lot of insecurity that Don has. There's a lot of like the evil sort of sociopathic tendencies that Don has. Like, earlier when he's with Betty, he's like clearly so unhappy with his marriage, and he like doesn't even make eye contact with her, and he like brushes his kid off like Sally doesn't matter. I mean, I get it. Sally is like obsessed with watching people do math on TV. I'd be upset too, but she's her kid, man. Sorry.
Yeah. asking her dad questions like, "What's the Electoral College?" Like, I don't know.
Who has time?
Who
for
knows
that?
what that is?
That's not appropriate for children, which I still don't get. Like, why is it bad to teach kids about the fucking Electoral College?
It's not. Well, that's the thing. It's not appropriate for him to have to try to explain it.
Right. My read of it, as I was telling John before we recorded, is that like he doesn't know either, and he's just like, I don't know.
Yeah, I like that read too.
It's something. It's just
take.
It's just the reason why we have these things.
What do you think about all this, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I do. Does Don know that his brother's dead based on the box of pictures? You don't know. That's right. I couldn't remember if we get more info on that later. But I wanted Don to punch Pete like so bad. Like I wanted Don to beat up Pete. In like their little in the office and they'll stare down, which would be very unproductive. It's just Pete got to me so much in this episode. Like it is a good line where he's like, "Do you think this is a movie where I have a gun to you and I won't shoot? I'll shoot.
I will shoot." Oh, it's such a good delivery. Vincent Kartheiser just nails it in this episode.
But yeah, I mean,
especially for the guy that literally brought a gun to the office.
Yeah. That's a good point. Good call.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think, like I said before, like they're both kind of living in this kind of perceived reality. Like they both think they're the main characters of their own movies. They both think they're the hero and the villains of their own story. And Bert's the only character here who lives in reality.
Yeah,
and maybe
the director, as it were.
Sure. So, which gets to obviously the crux of the episode, that scene where in his office, and I won't spoil it because
pitch perfect scene. And I think that it capitalizes everything that's great about Bert Cooper as a character, because all up until this point, what his behavior and his attitude toward what Pete tells him all makes perfect sense within what the show has set up. Down to there's even the whole so the reaction, of course, like when Pete is just like, Don isn't who he says he is. He's a deserter at the very least. He's like, one of the most memorable lines in the whole show. Mr. Campbell, who cares? What? Who cares? Like, it's just sort of like, seriously, who cares? It's like Matthew Weiner kind of saying to AMC, why are you making me even put all this like forced drama into my show? That's how I always took it, because I know that there were disagreements between AMC being like, you got to add in this central mystery. You have to add in this tension between him and Pete. There has to be all this stuff. I think this was Matthew Weiner's way of undercutting it and being like, that's not what this show is about. And like having Bert Cooper throughout the season be the Ayn Rand reader who's talking about like what he cares about Don has nothing to do with his name. It has everything to do with his personality, seeing through the charade that Don puts out and kind of getting to the heart of who he is. Matthew Weiner's way of getting to the heart of who these characters are. And real quick, I think like even the stuff like the way that he's so sentimental about Japanese culture and bonsai trees, it echoes a lot of like the way that Americans were very rationalized in terms of bringing the Japanese like into a sort of like, World War II is 20 years ago, but who cares? Like, you are who you are in this room. You are of value to us because you fuel the gears of like the American dream that we're putting out there. And so there is that sort of like reinvention, spirit that I think Bert Cooper evokes in a way that's believable. It's not sentimental. It's not about a fantasy of America. It's like he's the cold, hard realist that makes it kind of come together. And we cheer for it because we don't want the show to end. But obviously, like if you actually look at it, it's pretty messed up.
Well, I mean, it is all that stuff you're saying, but I think it's also like he's saying like it's the work. Like he really ultimately just cares about the work.
Yeah, he says like it's more profitable to forget this.
Right, exactly. And so he just wants Don to be Don. Like he doesn't care if he's Dick or whoever. As long as he's doing what he's doing and doing it well and helping, the firm, it's like, yeah, he can be whoever he wants.
This is a play. He even says to Don earlier in the episode, it's like, this is football to them. Like Bert has that same attitude of like, he doesn't care about things as like, he's not a moralist, right?
Right. Which I think gets down to like, kind of like we said before, the Nixon Kennedy thing. Like, yeah, they care about it in the moment, but at the end of the day, if Nixon loses, they'll just try to get Kennedy as their client. Like they'll just move on. They'll do another, thing. And obviously they want their client. They're going to fight for it. But if it, falls through, they'll just move on. It's
and
kind of
Nixon
what the
gets to
business
live
is.
another day, right?
Yeah,
There
yeah.
is that sort of like, that's why Nixon concedes, even though like he has a path to sort of contest the election. He's just like, no, I'm going to go out gracefully because my time is coming, right?
So that's why I like about like the election thing is especially like it's all this dramatic tension and it just sort of deflates, similar to like all this dramatic tension happened between Pete and Don, and just the opposite thing happens, but it just kind of it is what it is.
How many other shows do that on TV? Other shows would be like, well, in order for the climax, in order for the tension to dissipate, we have to have like you said, like Don punch Pete, or like Don kills Pete, or something dramatic and whoa, holy moly! But instead, it's not. It's real life adjacent.
Well, I mean, that kind of goes back to like the revelation with Adam earlier when he like finds Don or Dick again. You expect that moment where he goes to the apartment and he's gonna like shoot Adam and like throw him over like a bridge or something, and hide his identity and pretend Adam never existed. And it's just like, no, he just pays him off. And
he's not Tony Soprano. He's Don Draper.
Right. Yeah, which it makes it such a fascinating continuation and antithesis to Sopranos, given all the Sopranos people involved with the show, and why I'm very happy I'm watching the show after Sopranos. So.
Yeah, it's such a great successor in that sense, because Sopranos was so great at other things, and this show is so great at other things. Like, they're great complements to each other without being clones of each other, which I love. Mike, we've been spitting. We've been kind of just like over here doing like rap battles against an invisible opponent. Are you that opponent?
You guys kind of got me sold.
Mike hated it. He hated it.
No, I think you're completely right. I think it's so good. If I'm in a time capsule and I'm watching this episode without having seen the rest of the series, I'm watching it like I'm Will Ashton for the first time. My virgin eyes are laid upon this scene, and
a virgin like Don Draper.
Oh my God.
It does. It's so good. It's so good that the whole season has been building this. Like, who is Don? Like, what is it? And the answer is, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
It's so good. It's just so good.
There's so many people watching it who are feeling the exact same way. It's just like, I don't care. Like, okay, whatever. Yeah. Like, the mystery was better than the real answer.
Lost. Like, this isn't lost. It doesn't have to be a reveal that also has 9 more mysteries within it.
Exactly. That's such a good point. The way that this show has such a stronger legacy than Lost, I mean, that's certainly a key factor, isn't it? In terms of like the way that it handles its storytelling is way less sensationalized.
Yeah. Like, Burt Cooper isn't his long lost father,
Yeah.
Spoiler alerts. He's not.
Yeah, sorry. Well, I know you were kind of like, you had that on your conspiracy list. Bingo. By the way, I almost started this show because like we kind of glossed over his conversation with Peggy, who got like the security guard and the elevator operator in trouble because she reported a theft, and she's crying and she's upset, and Don has a reaction to her. But the first thing he says, he's like, "Peggy, this is my office. Does that door mean nothing to you?" I was going to start the show with like, "Michael, this is my podcast studio. Does that microphone mean nothing to you?" But I forgot to do it, so I'm sorry. I scrambled.
Wow, Door City over here.
Exactly. I should have rehearsed it. I didn't know you were watching the rehearsal on HBO Max.
Watched, loved, big fan.
Great. We'll have to have a chat about that on a later day when we have time.
I do want to say that Peggy's complaint was over modern day $30.
Yes, that's true. Because she says $3, yeah, which in that time was a bit, but yeah, you can reliably multiply by 10 and get like pretty close.
I think she's in the right.
I Googled it.
If you stole $30 from me, I'd be like, what the hell?
Yeah.
That was my lunch money, you jerks.
She calls it her mad money. Which I forgot to look that up. Like, what does that mean?
Well, that's
Madison
like
Avenue money?
What's it?
The money she gets paid for being on Mad Men.
Oh, there it is. So it's Elizabeth Moss.
It's the money she gets from Jim Cramer, the host of Mad Money.
What does Mad Money mean?
The actress's locker, yeah. And
here we go. Discretionary.
Like, the scene was so real.
It means discretionary money set aside for an emergency or for personal use. So that's why we don't know, because we don't save money between the three of us. Come on. Anyway.
Remember that movie Money Monster came out a few years ago? I never saw it.
Yeah, I saw that.
Is it good?
No.
It was like, what if Jim Cramer got in a hostage situation? Is that was like
because that was Clooney and Taron Egerton or something?
Yeah. Or no. It's he looks like Taron Egerton.
Oh, Jack O'Connell.
That's it. Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Julia Roberts.
It's not terrible. We talked about it on Now Conspiring, I think. So that was before your time, Will.
Wow. The Now Conspiring name drop. Let's go.
It had to happen eventually. We didn't reference Now Conspiring, Mike, when we had you on the earlier episodes of Mad Men.
Maybe. I think we mentioned the other podcast. I don't think we said the name.
Okay.
It was a good name.
There you go. I enjoyed it. The podcast and the name. So that's kind of how this episode ends, with everybody kind of just going to their collective corners and taking a deep breath. Is there any last thoughts on the episode? I mean, I know like there's plenty of stuff we didn't get to, but I feel like we covered the main stuff, like the good stuff, especially.
Should we talk about like that final shot with Don looking at the TV
speech? Yeah, it's
and like what's your read of Don in that moment? Like what's going through his head?
It's a concession speech from Nixon, isn't it? And he sees himself as Nixon. I think it's pretty clear cut.
Sure.
You know,
okay,
and sort of talk. I think it speaks to his attitude toward Pete, because they purposely choose that Pete is like, I'm sure you're as enthusiastic about Pete Campbell as as you are about me, watchers of Mad Men.
Right. I don't know. I didn't know if there was something deeper that I wasn't catching, but I mean, I figured that was apparent.
There might be.
Yeah.
It is Mad Men. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to say something about Bert giving Don now the permission to fire Pete Campbell. Being that he was the one who protected him before, and it was like, Don, you got to play the game. So interesting that he's now just like, hey, motherfucker blackmailed you. I get it. Like,
right.
But you don't know what's he say?
You never know where loyalty is born. Yeah, where or how, something to that effect. One never knows. Wise words.
One thing I did want to casually mention, and I don't know if this was like an intentional thing or just something that I kind of read too much into, but the shot before Don runs into Pete's office and confronts him, there's like that shot of Don. It's like the rare shot we've seen where it's like Don out of focus. It's like, you know, it like zooms in on him, but it zooms in like too close, so it gets like a little out of focus. And I really like that. It feels like this sort of like spontaneous moment for him. Like it's this like rare, like we see him as such a like well-kept guy, someone who's like very like orderly and performant, and
always contained in the frame, never broken or fragmented. Yeah.
And this is like this rare moment where I don't know if it was like one of those things where like it's purposely kind of off kilter, or like they ran through the shot and it went a little bit awry, but then Weiner was in the edit and was like, actually that's kind of more fitting if we did it this way. It feels a little bit more honest. And I don't know, I just thought it was like a neat thing to include in this episode. I don't know if that's just me, like I said, reading too much into it, but I felt very purposeful watching it, even though it might have been an accident.
Happy accidents.
Yeah, there you go. Which I'm going to get to as we finish out the show, actually. But real quick, I'll say that I think part of the read you can also add to that last shot, Will, is, Don is kind of finally listening to a mentor for the first time. He's taking Bert's advice of keeping an eye on Pete. And I think that shot of like the Nixon concession speech, it more or less, I think, solidifies, him conceding not just to Pete Campbell, but to his life at home and deciding not to leave Betty. I think that's kind of where it ends there. It's just sort of like, to him, there was like this sort of like, do I move on to Rachel and I go the path of Kennedy, of the younger, not younger wife, but like the sort of like new thing, like the next, like not the 50s, not Eisenhower, all that. Last thing I got, guys, is some trivia and we're done. Who's ready? Unless there were any final thoughts.
I do. I have one question for Will, and then we can do trivia.
Okay.
You haven't seen the end of the show, Will. Who do you think has a better end of the decade? Nixon or Don?
Yeah, it's a prediction. Who do you predict?
I don't know. I'll give it to Don, but I don't know.
Okay. We'll have to revisit that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
a decade for Richard Nixon.
Yeah,
let me put this in terms of like long-term bets for the show.
I mean, I don't think either of them are going to have a great decade ahead, but
Don is the burglar that Nixon hires to go into the hotel.
That would be fun.
Anyways, I'm ready for trivia.
Mike, did you see The Post?
The Post?
Yeah, the movie The Post, Spielberg's.
Yeah.
Yes.
You remember how at the end of that movie they had like an MCU teaser for Watergate?
Yeah, I do remember that. That's very funny.
I wish that they had like a guy playing like Carl Bernstein, like come out of a bush and be like,
right,
looking up at it and just being like, "It's time," something. Well, like
just
that.
like just like a guy zooms into the room, just like, "Who are you? Call me Bob Woodward," and just hard cut the black.
Yeah, he's wearing an eye patch for some reson.
And then like in the audience,
it's Samuel
like,
L. Jackson.
Who's Bob Woodward? It's like, well, yeah, if you know, it's just like some like the way you treat like whomever, and like
the usher is like breathlessly trying to explain it, like the family of four.
You go to YouTube, the post end credit scene explained, and it's like Soups from TikTok being like, "I cannot believe we just got Bob Woodward."
Amazing casting.
I had a hard time watching this episode because I just got done watching American Horror Story double feature. It was like the season from last year, but like one of the stories is about Eisenhower signing a treaty with aliens, and then like Nixon's in it and JFK's in it, and basically everything that happens is because of aliens. So take that for.
I'm going to take that as we need to wrap this up before we go down a tangent. We don't want to go down. So real quick, some trivia. John Hamm broke his hand during the explosion scene that they were rehearsing for the Korea. Yeah, in Korea. One of the first scenes that they shot for the episode.
Oh, they shot that first. I was wondering if they shot that last because it looked like his sideburns were shorter. So I thought they might have.
That's weird that you noticed that, but you might have noticed that his right hand is concealed for a lot of the scenes in this episode for that reason. Because he had to like wear a cast. You can actually see his right hand is a little swollen if you look closely when he actually picks up Sally. So, also, Rich Sommer has said that they were going to use real alcohol for the party scenes, but they forgot to bring any. And he also said this was his favorite day of shooting for season 1. He and John Hamm say that this is their favorite episode of the season.
Cool.
Fun. The scene where Ken chases Allison and reveals her panties is based off a real practice from the time called scuttling. They would actually take the woman's panties off during the real version. So I had to bring that up because it's even worse than what we got in the show, which I'm glad that they didn't do that. Very appreciative of that. One of the only improvised scenes in the show in this episode is when Stephanie Courtney, who plays Marge, of course, takes Peggy's drink and pours it into her cup after Peggy leaves, which I loved. I love that little moment. Fun.
Oh, that was improvised? That's fun. Nice.
You'll notice an extra actually spills some alcohol on herself when Joan kisses Sal. I like to think that they were trying to channel Carol or something.
Yeah.
But they left it in.
She looks down at her. Yeah, she looks down at her bus.
They left it in because it looks so realistic and it fits. Joan mentioning Orson Welles in the line, "You look so different when you're drunk," comes from Matthew Weiner, who said both of these things to Michael Gladys during the pilot shoot and the post-pilot party, respectively. Obviously, a play on like he does look like Orson Welles, and he plays the character that way.
Yeah, I thought that was the case because it seemed like a very like people brought that up on set and they're just like, you know what, we'll just put it in the episode.
Exactly. Yeah. Clearly not part of the intention of that character necessarily. Harry's glasses in the show are Rich Sommer's real glasses. They took a screw out of it to make them look broken, but they're not actually broken. Pete was not supposed to back up when Don came at him in that scene. That was just Vincent Kartheiser's natural reaction. So like when Don kind of like steps up to him and he kind of does that
even
totally improvised.
Hands up a little bit.
Not even improvised. It was just like a natural reaction. Yeah. And that's it. That's the trivia for this episode. Next week, we're going to talk about The Wheel, which has it's maybe not the best episode of the season compared to this one, but I think it genuinely has one of the all-time great Mad Men pitches. I think a lot of people argue it is the best one of the whole series, and I'm excited to watch it because I love rewatching this episode, and we'll be back for it. Yeah. Any last words?
I mean, we can keep talking about the post if you want.
I think we're good then. I think that means we're good.
If anybody's listening and you didn't like this episode, who cares?
There it is. There it is. That's it.
That's what we were waiting for. All right. See you next week, everyone.
Bye-bye.